Hello, and a very warm welcome to Sapporo Gakuen University's Community College for our last edition of Global Issues in English. And today's topic is a summary of all the previous talks we have had in this program. As usual, before we begin, please go to this site where you can find some vocabulary support and language exercises which will help you. All right, in this series of talks, we've looked at all of these topics. Do you remember? We spoke about internationalism, renewable energy, farming, global health, and many other topics. And today, I'd like to think about three things. First of all, updates. Things are changing very, very quickly. Since we started these talks about 6 months ago, there have been many new developments and updates, and I'd like to look at a few of them. Even though today, as I speak, there will be new developments again, and this will quickly become out of date. The second thing I'd like to look at is connections. How are our topics connected? I noticed when I was making these talks that they couldn't be separated, and we'll look at how some very important keywords connect these topics together. And finally, I'd like to think about the future, whether we can be optimistic, cheerful and positive about the future, or pessimistic, dark and negative about the future over the next 10, 20, 50 or 100 years. All right, let's start with some updates. And the first update I'd like to look at is that in medical technology, and particularly the big news now, of course, is the coronavirus, the COVID-19. We have at least three vaccines, probably 4 or 5, which is very good news. We have much better understanding of viruses, and we can be better prepared for the next pandemic. So all of this is good news. In the red, you'll see the letters mRNA. This is the very new technology for understanding viruses. And what it means is perhaps in future, when we have another pandemic, we will be able to find a vaccine much more quickly than this year. Other updates in medical technology, of course, we have always been focused on the coronavirus, but in fact, with cancers, we have many new developments. A new blood test, a very simple test to take blood, can diagnose about 50 types of cancer. So this again is very good news. In the USA, and probably around the world, the 5-year survival rate for all cancers is now 69%. So people are living with cancers much longer than they used to. So this is good news. On the other hand, sadly, very unfortunately, because of the coronavirus, many people couldn't go to hospital, and so they died of other diseases too, which is very unfortunate. And we can see also in poorer countries in the world, particularly in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, the number of children are dying, and that is increasing because budgets have been cut, not so much money, and aid is going to these countries. And so as a result, more and more young people, especially children, are not surviving. And this includes 4,900 deaths from malaria, which is, again, not such good news. Also, very importantly, we have energy updates. Big news, of course, is China, which produces the most carbon dioxide in the world. China says it will become carbon neutral by 2060, which is good news. Japan will become carbon neutral by 2050. Again, excellent news. South Korea will become carbon neutral also by 2050. And in fact, many countries in the world, this is very new news, have promised to be carbon neutral by 2050, or even sooner. There's a lot of pressure on countries now to use renewable energy. And we can see under the pictures, global emissions of CO2 decreased by 7% in 2020. Now, most people say this decrease is because of the coronavirus and less economic activity, but if this figure can be maintained, it will be good news in future. And we can see pictures of this. We can see on the left, the black line is historical emissions. At the end of the black line is 2020, and we can go in 3 directions. The direction we are heading in at the moment is the purple. This is the optimistic scenario, and that is an increase in global temperatures of about 2.1 degrees centigrade. If we continue to do nothing, we will be in the blue area, which will be very dangerous. And if we are lucky and have a more aggressive and more positive attitude, we will be in the green area, which will be the best way to go. But at the moment, it looks as if we are following the purple area, which is not so bad. Particularly again with China producing about 50% of the world's carbon dioxide. If China keeps to its promises, after 2030, we can see a big decrease in CO2 emissions from China, and this is very important. Another energy update is about green hydrogen, which is, people are very, very excited now about the green hydrogen technology, and there are movements all around the world, including Japan, in Fukushima, for example, of building hydrogen-based energy systems. The problems are it's expensive, it needs a lot of energy to make, and there are many technical challenges. However, many big companies around the world and many governments are very excited by the new technology, and it is a very good direction for clean energy in future. However, if we see the red printing on this slide, only about 0.1% of the world's hydrogen is green hydrogen today, so we have a long road in front of us with many challenges. Another piece of good news is about ocean sanctuaries. Do you remember when we looked at fishing, we discussed marine sanctuaries? This is the areas of the ocean that are protected from fishing. Fishing is banned in these areas. And very recently, there's been a new ocean sanctuary in the middle of the Pacific, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. If you can see that very small map on the left, you can see the area between the south of Africa and South America. This is an island called Tristan da Cunha, and around the island, we now have the fourth largest marine protected area. It's 687,000 square kilometers, and it is a very important area for wildlife and wild birds. In addition, on the right, we can see a further 3 million square kilometers will be added in 2021. So this is very good news for fish. The bad news, unfortunately, we look at the ice in the North Pole, in the Arctic. We can see the summer sea ice has decreased by 40% since 1975. These are measurements taken in September 1975 and September 2020, when the ice is at its lowest level, and it has gone down by 40%. And we can see the map. The map below shows how much ice has disappeared. Now, why is this important? It's important because the ice acts like a mirror on the sea, and when the sun shines down into the ice, it is reflected back into space, so it doesn't heat up the atmosphere. However, if you take away the mirror, the sun rays will shine directly into the ocean, and it will warm the seas and melt more and more ice. So it's a very difficult situation. Another problem, again in the Arctic area, is this very sudden appearance of these strange holes. This is in Siberia, and these holes are made by methane gas escaping from under the surface. As the land becomes warmer and warmer, the gas builds up and then it explodes, sending thousands and thousands of tons of methane into the air. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas, and this is not a good situation. We can see these pictures here in Siberia, but they are also happening under the sea. There's a place, perhaps you can see on the map, called the Laptev Sea, which is a very shallow sea, and there's a lot of methane coming to the surface from those areas. So these are worrying trends. Another very negative thing is continuing Amazon deforestation, cutting down trees in the Amazon, destroying habitats at an increasing level. So between 2019 and 2020, 11,088 square kilometers have disappeared. This is the highest level since 2008, and it is a very worrying situation. So we have a problem. It's perhaps this is called a tipping point. And the tipping point is where if we have too much damage, we cannot reverse. We pass a point and it cannot go back. And some people are worried that this is too little, too late. And the UN report just on December the 2nd this year says we are not doing enough. We need to do more. Connections and keywords. As we said, these are the topics that we studied, but we cannot separate them. In these talks, of course, week by week, we separated the topics. In fact, they are all connected, and the connecting word is probably lifestyles. So, for example, when we looked at food, we can see food is connected to global health, the rise of diseases like diabetes and heart attacks, to internationalism, the network of sending food from one country to another, importing, exporting food. Farming, of course, is connected to food, destruction of forests, the feeding of so much food to animals, and of course fishing, overfishing, a continuing problem. We looked at climate change, and climate change, of course, connected to farming, floods and droughts, heat islands, making survival very difficult. Climate change connected to fishing. We see fishing habits are changing. The fish are moving in different areas. The industry, for example, the kombu industry in Hokkaido is suffering because sea temperatures are going up. And of course, plants and animals also suffering from climate change. Renewable energy, of course, we can see connected to climate change, of course, to energy storage and to fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas. So global issues cannot be separated into each compartment. They are all connected. And plastic, of course, the other one, destroying animals in the sea. Food, we are eating plastic, which is not good enough. And health, of course, these children living in plastic waste is very bad for health. And another key word, of course, is consumption, and particularly what we call overconsumption. For example, we eat too much, especially meat and sugar. We use too much dirty energy, especially coal, oil and gas. We waste too much, especially food and plastic. And we value convenience, 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 more than the well-being of the earth. Another thing we need to think about is balance. Much of the responsibility for consumption and gas emissions in the planet is with the richest people in the world. So we can see here that the rich 10%, which includes Japan, consume 49% of the world's energy and food. And the poorest 50% only use about 12% of the world's food and energy. So the responsibility is with us, the rich countries, and this is something we shouldn't forget when we face the challenges of global issues. Now, finally, the future. Am I an optimist, a happy person, positive about the future, or a pessimist, a sad person about the future? Well, in fact, on Mondays, I'm a pessimist. On Tuesdays, I'm an optimist. On Wednesdays, I'm a pessimist. On Thursdays, I'm an optimist, etc., etc. Now, I should explain that. So let's look at this slide. On Mondays, you can see I'm a pessimist. Why? The levels of CO2 are increasing. And we can see this from the information in this table taken from the mountains in Hawaii. CO2 in the atmosphere. December the 5th, 2020 was 413 parts per million, very high. December the 5th, 2019, 1 year ago, 410. 10 years ago, 389. 200 years ago, 280 parts per million. So going up and up. Still seeing records broken all around the world with hot weather. And in big writing at the bottom, we still get about 80% of our energy from fossil fuels. So fossil fuels continue to be the biggest challenge that we're facing. So on Mondays, I'm a pessimist. However, on Tuesdays, I'm an optimist about greenhouse gases. Tokyo, California, the UK, and other countries will ban the sale of gasoline cars from 2030. So we'll be using electric cars or hydrogen cars. And so this is good news, and these will be growing all around the world. Newer technologies, lower costs, political pressures are leading to very dynamic developments in clean and responsible environmental programs. So this is very, very important. It's a very dynamic area. Renewable energies are growing. Hydrogen power is growing. We can be grateful for some good news. Unfortunately, on Wednesdays, I'm a pessimist again because of deforestation. People are cutting down the forests. There's habitat loss. Animals, birds are losing their homes. We can see in the Amazon how much the percentage of Amazon forest that's lost in Congo, in Africa, Australia, Sudanland, which is Indonesia, Indo-Burma, around Myanmar. All of these places losing forests, thousands and thousands of hectares. Very, very sad news. However, on Thursdays, I'm happy again because there's reforestation, many campaigns to plant and replant forests. There are 3 that are listed here. One is called the 2020 Initiative, a project to plant 20 million hectares of land by this year. Something called the Bonn Challenge, Bonn in Germany, a global effort to restore 150 million hectares of the world's forests by 2020, 350 million hectares by 2030. Another one, the New York Declaration of Forests, that will replant 350 million hectares by 2030. And many campaigns around the world, including Japan, are replanting forests again. So this is good news. Unfortunately, on Friday, I'm pessimistic again. We find low incomes. Health is still a problem. Mothers dying in Africa, having babies, again, a very dangerous business. 254,000 mothers die every year. So this is really terrible, terrible news. And worldwide, 2.4 million children died in the first month of life in 2019. So the coronavirus is really less important for these people than these kinds of problems. And again, malaria, as I mentioned before, mostly in Africa, mostly children, killing about 500,000 people. So very, very sad news. However, when we look at this information, we can see things are much better. So I'm an optimist again, and we look at global health. We see that the death of children is a terrible, terrible thing. But if we look at 1990, it was 12.5 million. In 2019, 5.2 million. And we can see the graph on the right. The numbers are going down and down. So this is very, very good news. Malaria, as we see, malaria, very shocking and serious problem, but much, much better than in 2004. And then finally, globally, life expectancy, 1950 was only 48 years. 2020, it's 72.63 years. So everybody in the world is living longer, and we guess more healthy lives. So this is good news. So on Sunday, I'm very confused. I don't know whether I'm an optimist, cheerful, or a pessimist. It's very, very tricky to know. But I do know that we do have many, many challenges. And these are some things we need to think about. What can we do? It's very, very important that we educate ourselves. And if we look at the brown square on the right, this is the number 12 issue in the Sustainable Development Goals, responsible consumption and production. And these are some questions we should ask ourselves. Where does our food come from? Do we know where the food comes from? Number 2, who produces our food? Do we know the situation in which our food is produced? Does it damage the environment? Next, where does our energy come from? Do we know where our energy comes from? What kind of energy do we use? Do we use coal or oil or gas or renewables? We mostly don't know. How much energy do we use? Again, this is something that's important to know. Is our energy use increasing or decreasing? What can we do to use less energy? How much plastic do we throw away and use? Can we cut the amount of plastic that we use? Is it possible? Can we live without plastic? etc., etc. And finally, do our lifestyles, again, this keyword lifestyles, damage the environment? Is the way we're living damaging our environment? If so, how is it damaging our environment? And these are questions we really should ask ourselves, and this is why we should educate ourselves and try to find the answers. So to go on, optimistic or pessimistic, I really don't know. What I do know is that the next 10 years will be very, very important in the development of the world. And in 10 years' time, we will know whether our future will be dark, whether it will be heat islands, floods, droughts, lack of food, obesity, hunger, and a very terrible place to live, or, if we're lucky, whether it will be a clean and healthy environment in which we can live in harmony with the plants and animals around us. And finally, this is the end of the topics. I know they have been challenging and tricky in many cases, but thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.